My name is Russell Carter. I'm 69 years old, and for most of my life I believed a man's value wasn't measured by the words he spoke, but by the responsibilities he carried. I spent 43 years building a plumbing business from the ground up, crawling beneath houses in the Oklahoma heat, standing knee-deep in icy water during winter emergencies, and answering midnight phone calls because someone's basement was flooding and they needed help. It wasn't glamorous work. Nobody ever applauds the man who fixes a broken pipe. They only notice when he doesn't show up. I showed up. Every single time. That habit followed me long after I retired. People think retirement means slowing down. For me, it simply meant my work shifted from customers to family. The alarm clock still rang before sunrise. I still made coffee before anyone else was awake. I still walked through the house checking little things that nobody else noticed. A loose cabinet hinge, a dripping faucet, a fence board beginning to split after another Oklahoma thunderstorm. Old habits become part of a man. You stop thinking about them. They simply become who you are. I lived in a quiet suburb outside Tulsa, where every driveway looked almost identical and neighbors still waved when they passed each other. Children rode bicycles through the streets in the evenings. Lawn mowers hummed every Saturday morning. It was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about when they talked about stability. From the outside, my life looked exactly the same. Inside my own home, stability had been quietly dying for years. I met my wife, Denise, almost 14 years ago. She had already been through one marriage that ended badly. She carried herself with the cautious smile of someone who had learned not to trust promises too quickly. Her son, Ethan, was in his early 20s then, old enough to make his own decisions, young enough to still need someone steady in his life. I never tried to replace his father. That was never my goal. I simply believed that if I treated him fairly, respected his space, and remained consistent, eventually we would build something that resembled mutual respect. Respect. It's such a small word. People throw it around as though it's free. It isn't. It's earned one ordinary day at a time. For 13 years, I tried earning it. When Denise and I married, I didn't move into her house. She moved into mine. The mortgage was already paid off after decades of hard work. Every room carried memories I'd built before she entered my life, but I welcomed her without hesitation. I wanted the house to become ours. So we painted rooms together, bought new furniture, redecorated the kitchen, turned spare bedrooms into guest rooms. I told myself that homes weren't made from drywall and lumber. They were made from shared effort. First, Ethan seemed grateful. He thanked me when I helped repair his car after someone backed into it at a grocery store parking lot. He thanked me when I covered the deductible because he couldn't afford it. He thanked me when I spent 2 weekends helping him remodel his first apartment after a pipe burst behind the bathroom wall. Back then, I thought we were becoming family. Looking back now, I wonder if gratitude was simply easier while he still needed something. Need has a funny way of sounding like appreciation. Once people stop needing you, they often stop pretending. When he lost a job during an economic slowdown, I never asked how long he'd need help. I simply helped. When his health insurance lapsed between employers, I quietly paid several medical bills before collectors started calling. When his transmission failed, I paid the mechanic because I knew reliable transportation meant another chance at finding work. Denise always thanked me. Ethan usually nodded. That became enough. Or at least I convinced myself it was. People often ask why stepfathers stay in situations where they're clearly not appreciated. The answer isn't complicated. You don't notice disrespect while it's growing. It doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates, like rust beneath fresh paint. The first signs were so small I almost laughed them off. Ethan stopped asking before borrowing my tools. Then he stopped returning them. One afternoon I spent nearly an hour searching for a pipe, wrench, I'd owned since 1989 before finding it tossed behind lawn equipment in the garage, covered in mud. When I mentioned it, he shrugged. I figured you weren't using it. Not an apology. Just an explanation. Denise smiled awkwardly. He's forgetful. Forgetful. That word became one of her favorites. Later it was my extension ladder. Then my pressure washer. Then my socket set. Every conversation ended the same way. "Don't make a big deal out of it, Russell." So I didn't, because peace inside a marriage sometimes feels more valuable than being right. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. The years rolled forward. My retirement savings paid for a new air conditioning system, a roof replacement after hail damage, updated kitchen appliances, fresh carpeting, security cameras, a monitored alarm system, fiber internet. Every utility account remained in my name because I'd always handled the bills. Electricity, water, natural gas, trash collection, internet, home insurance, maintenance contracts. Nobody ever asked whose name appeared on those statements. They simply expected everything to work. Flip a switch, light, open a faucet, water, connect a laptop, internet, push a garage remote, door opens. Convenience has an interesting effect on people. After enough time, they stop seeing the person creating it. They only notice the comfort. Then Brooke entered Ethan's life. She was attractive, confident, and possessed the kind of effortless certainty that usually belongs to people who have never paid many consequences for their behavior. The first time Denise invited her over for dinner, I welcomed her warmly. I grilled steaks in the backyard, cleaned the patio furniture, even bought the peach cobbler Denise knew Ethan liked. Brooke barely looked at me. She spent most of dinner scrolling through her phone while Ethan laughed at videos she showed him. Whenever I tried joining the conversation, she'd answer politely enough before immediately turning back toward him. I told myself she was shy. I wanted to believe that, because the alternative was much harder to admit. Some people decide exactly what you are within the first 5 minutes, and nothing you do afterward changes their mind. By the third visit, she had begun making little comments. "This furniture feels kind of old. I'd paint these walls white. You should really modernize this place." Each remark came with a smile. Each smile hit a blade. I glanced toward Denise more than once, expecting her to remind Brooke she was criticizing someone else's home. Instead, Denise laughed softly. "I've been telling Russell that for years." I smiled, pretended it didn't bother me. Inside, something had already begun to crack. Not because of Brooke, because my own wife seemed perfectly comfortable handing her the hammer. My retirement should have been peaceful. I'd earned that much. 43 years of busted knuckles, frozen crawl spaces, flooded basements, and emergency service calls had finally come to an end. Every scar on my hands had a story behind it. Every ache in my back had paid for something tangible. The house, the truck, the savings account, the quiet life I thought Denise and I would enjoy together. Instead, retirement became another full-time job. Nobody asked me to take it. They simply expected it. I became the man who noticed everything before anyone else did. If the smoke detector started chirping at 2 in the morning, I was already standing on a ladder before anyone else climbed out of bed. If the lawn needed mowing, I had the mower running before breakfast. If a gutter clogged after one of Oklahoma's heavy spring storms, I cleaned it before the water could damage the siding. Not because anyone thanked me, because that's how I was built. A house doesn't stay standing because people admire it. It stays standing because someone keeps maintaining the parts nobody notices. That someone was me. Denise used to appreciate those things, or at least she acted like she did. She would kiss my cheek after I'd spent an afternoon repairing something around the house and tell her friends how lucky she was to have married a man who could fix anything. Those moments became less frequent as the years passed. Eventually, my work simply blended into the background. The repaired faucet wasn't impressive anymore. The trimmed hedges became normal. The freshly serviced air conditioner became expected. Comfort has a dangerous habit of making people forget who created it. I didn't notice the shift immediately. Maybe I didn't want to. Love has a way of convincing you that small disappointments are temporary. That tomorrow will be different. That next week people will remember. Tomorrow kept coming. Nothing changed. Ethan gradually spent more and more time at the house again after another relationship ended. He was well into his 30s by then, old enough to understand responsibility, yet somehow always one paycheck away from needing help. At first it was temporary. Just until I get back on my feet. I'd heard those words before. I believed them again. Denise wanted her son close, and I couldn't blame her for that. Every mother worries. Every parent hopes the next opportunity will finally be the one that changes everything. So I welcomed him back. I cleared space in the garage for his things, helped him move furniture, even bought extra groceries because I knew a grown man could empty a refrigerator faster than two retirees ever could. I never asked for rent, never asked him to split utilities, never even asked him to contribute toward household expenses. Not once. Looking back, that wasn't generosity. It was the beginning of entitlement. People rarely appreciate what costs them nothing. The first few months passed quietly enough. Then Brooke became a permanent fixture. She wasn't officially living with us. At least nobody ever had the courtesy to ask. She simply started staying overnight. One night became three. Three became a week. Eventually, her car appeared in the driveway more often than it disappeared. She began receiving packages at the house, using our washing machine, cooking in our kitchen, inviting her friends over while Denise and I were out running errands. Again, nobody asked. They assumed. One Saturday afternoon, I walked into the garage looking for a storage bin and found Brooke directing Ethan as they rearranged shelves I'd organized years earlier. "No," she said, pointing toward my workbench. "Move all this old stuff over there." Old stuff. She was pointing at decades of carefully organized tools. Pipe cutters, torque wrenches, threading dies, equipment that had built my livelihood. I smiled politely. I'd appreciate it if my workbench stayed the way it is. She didn't apologize. Instead, she laughed softly. "We're just trying to make better use of the space." Interesting word. She'd been around less than 6 months, already speaking as though she owned the place. Ethan looked at me with visible irritation. "Come on, Russell." Not Dad. Not even my first name. Just Russell. "She's trying to help." Help. By reorganizing another man's property without permission. I carried the storage bin back into the house and said nothing else. Silence had become my specialty. Denise found me later folding laundry. "You could have handled that differently." I stared at her. "Differently how?" "You embarrassed Brooke." I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I just heard. She was moving my tools. Denise folded another towel. "She's young. She wants to make the place nicer." The place. Not our home. The place. As though ownership belonged to whoever had the strongest opinion. That conversation stayed with me for days. Not because of Brooke. Because Denise never once acknowledged that those tools belonged to me. She only worried about Brooke's feelings. It became a pattern. Brooke criticized. Denise excused. Ethan defended. And somehow I became the difficult one. A week later, I came home from the hardware store and noticed several framed photographs missing from the living room shelves. Pictures of my parents. My late brother. Fishing trips from decades ago. I eventually found them wrapped in newspaper inside a cardboard box in the basement. Brooke was hanging oversized decorative prints where my family photographs had been. "Oh," she said casually when she saw me. "These look much more modern." I held one of my mother's photographs in my hands for several seconds. "When were you planning on asking me?" She shrugged. "I figured you wouldn't mind." That sentence echoed through my mind long after she walked away. I figured you wouldn't mind. No permission. No respect. Just assumption. That evening I looked around the living room and realized something unsettling. Very little of me remained visible inside the home I'd spent decades building. My pictures had disappeared. My favorite chair had been moved into the den because Brooke said it ruined the room. Even the coffee mugs I'd used every morning for years had quietly vanished from the kitchen cabinets, replaced by matching designer sets she'd bought online. Small things, individually meaningless. Together, they felt like an eviction already in progress. I still refused to believe it would go any further. After all, this was my home, my marriage, my life. Surely there was a line nobody would cross. I had no idea that line was only days away from disappearing forever. My bedroom was the last place in the house that still felt like mine. That probably sounds strange coming from a man who legally owned the property, but ownership and belonging are two different things. You can have your name on every document, every insurance policy, every tax record, and still feel like a guest inside your own walls. My bedroom was different. It still held the oak dresser I'd bought 30 years earlier. My late father's hunting rifle remained locked inside the closet safe. My side of the dresser still smelled faintly of cedar from the blocks I'd tucked into the drawers years ago. The nightstand held the same reading lamp I'd used since before I met Denise, and every evening I'd sit in the same worn recliner near the window before going to bed. It wasn't luxurious. It was familiar. After a lifetime of hard work, familiar becomes more valuable than expensive. Brooke didn't understand that. One Tuesday afternoon, I walked into the bedroom after mowing the lawn and immediately noticed something was wrong. The recliner was gone. At first I thought Denise had asked someone to move it while the carpet was being cleaned. Then I saw it. The chair was sitting in the garage. Not carefully placed. Dumped. A stack of paint cans leaned against one armrest, and somebody had tossed extension cords across the seat. For several seconds I simply stared. I remembered buying that chair after retiring. It had been my gift to myself. Every morning I'd drink coffee there while watching the sun rise over the backyard. Every evening I'd read until I became sleepy enough for bed. It wasn't just furniture. It represented peace. Now it was collecting dust beside lawn fertilizer. I carried it back into the house by myself. Slowly, my knees complained with every step. When I finally set it back beside the bedroom window, Brooke appeared in the doorway. "Oh," she said, "I thought we agreed to move that." "We?" She smiled as though I'd misunderstood. "It makes the room feel cramped." I looked at her for a long moment. "This is my bedroom." She crossed her arms. "Not anymore." The words were almost whispered, soft enough that another person might have missed them. I didn't. Before I could answer, Denise called from the kitchen. "Brooke, could you help me with dinner?" Brooke walked away without another word. I stood there alone, staring at the doorway she'd just left through. Not anymore. The sentence echoed through my head long after she disappeared. That evening I mentioned it to Denise while we washed dishes. "I think Brooke's getting a little too comfortable." Denise didn't even look up. "She's just excited. She told me my bedroom wasn't mine anymore." Denise sighed the way people do when they're tired of hearing about the same problem. "Oh, Russell. No." I dried my hands and faced her. "Don't dismiss this." She finally looked at me. "You know she doesn't mean everything literally." Then what exactly did she mean? Silence. Then the familiar answer. "You're being too sensitive." Too sensitive. Interesting phrase. Nobody calls you too generous after you've paid the mortgage for 13 years. Nobody calls you too dependable after you've quietly handled every repair. But the moment you ask for respect, you're too sensitive. I went to bed that night with a strange feeling in my chest. Not anger. Something colder. The feeling a homeowner gets after noticing the first crack in a foundation. You know something is wrong. You just don't know how bad it really is. Over the next few days, Brooke became bolder. She started referring to the house as our place. She ordered decorative items online without asking anyone. She replaced the shower curtain in the guest bathroom because she said the old one looked cheap. Then she began making decisions about my bedroom without even pretending to include me. I came home Thursday afternoon and discovered new bedding spread across my bed. Gray comforter. Decorative pillows. Everything I'd chosen years earlier had vanished. I opened the linen closet. My blankets had been stuffed onto the highest shelf. When I carried them back downstairs, Brooke looked genuinely confused. "What are you doing?" "I prefer my own bedding." She laughed. "This looks much nicer." I didn't ask what looked nicer. Ethan entered the room carrying grocery bags. "Seriously, Russell?" I turned toward him. "Seriously what?" "She's trying to make the house look good." I folded my blanket across my arm. "This bedroom belongs to Denise and me." He rolled his eyes. "It's just a comforter." No, it wasn't. It was another decision made without permission. Another reminder that my opinions no longer mattered. That night I couldn't sleep. Denise lay beside me reading on her tablet while I stared into the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" She lowered the tablet. "What? When did everyone stop treating this as my home?" Her expression tightened. "What kind of question is that?" "A serious one." She hesitated. "Nobody's treating you differently." I almost smiled. When someone tells you that your own experience isn't real, the conversation is already over. Friday arrived like every other Friday. I ran a few errands that morning, stopped by the hardware store, picked up birdseed, filled my truck with gas. The weather was beautiful. Blue sky, warm breeze. Absolutely nothing suggested that by nightfall my marriage would be effectively over. Around 6 that evening, Ethan texted Denise asking if Brooke could stay for the weekend. Denise answered before I even had a chance to respond. Of course. No discussion, no conversation, just another decision. By 7 o'clock, I was sitting in my recliner beside the bedroom window reading a Louis L'Amour novel when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy footsteps, purposeful. The bedroom door swung open without a knock. Ethan walked in first. Brooke followed behind him, struggling with a large rolling suitcase. Not an overnight bag, not a backpack, a full-sized suitcase. She wheeled it straight into the room. Then, without asking permission or saying a single word to me, she lifted it onto my bed. My eyes slowly moved from the suitcase to Ethan. Something told me the line I'd been praying nobody would cross had just disappeared forever. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stood at the foot of my bed with his hands in his pockets, looking at me the way a landlord might look at a tenant whose lease had expired. There wasn't an ounce of uncertainty in his face. No embarrassment, no guilt, just complete confidence that whatever he was about to say would become reality. Brooke rested one hand on the suitcase handle and smiled faintly. Not a friendly smile, a victorious one. I slowly closed the book in my lap and laid it on the nightstand. "What exactly is going on?" I asked. Neither of them answered immediately. Ethan glanced toward Brooke first, almost as though he wanted an audience for what came next. Then he looked back at me. "She's taking this room." The words hung in the air. For a second, I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood him. "I'm sorry?" "You heard me." He nodded toward the bed. "Brooke's moving in." I looked from him to the suitcase and back again. "This is my bedroom." "No." His voice remained calm. "It's our bedroom now." I stared at him. "Our?" He shrugged. "Mine and Brooke's." Silence filled the room. Outside, I could hear a lawn mower somewhere down the street. A dog barked twice. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary was happening. Inside my own home, everything had changed. I stood up slowly from the recliner. "I think you've lost your mind." Brooke laughed. It wasn't loud, just enough to let me know she found the situation amusing. Ethan folded his arms. "You're retired." I waited. So you don't need the room." For a moment, I couldn't even process the logic. "I don't need. The couch is fine." He said it as casually as someone recommending a different restaurant. "You fall asleep watching television half the time anyway." I looked directly into his eyes. "You expect me to move out of my own bedroom?" He nodded once. "Exactly." I waited for Denise. Surely she had heard the conversation. Surely she would walk into the room and tell her son he had crossed a line no decent person should ever cross. Instead, I heard her footsteps approaching the hallway. Relief washed over me. Finally, someone with common sense. Denise appeared in the doorway carrying folded bath towels. She looked at Ethan, then Brooke, then me. No surprise crossed her face. No confusion. Only a strange, uncomfortable smile. She handed the towels to Brooke. "Here." Brooke thanked her. Denise smiled warmly. "If you need extra blankets, there's another set in the linen closet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at my wife. "Denise." She finally looked at me. What is this?" She shifted uncomfortably. "They're young." I blinked. "What does that have to do with anything?" "They'll be more comfortable in here." I honestly thought I was about to wake up. The conversation felt unreal. This is our bedroom. I know. Our bed. I know. My clothes are in this closet. I know, Russell. Every answer came quietly, almost gently, as though she were trying to soothe a child instead of explaining why her husband was being removed from his own bedroom. I searched her face for some sign this was a misunderstanding. There wasn't one. She had already accepted it. The decision had been made before anyone walked through the bedroom door. Nobody had simply bothered telling me. Ethan pointed toward the hallway. You can move your stuff later. My eyes shifted back to him. No. His expression hardened. What do you mean, no? I mean no. For the first time that evening his voice rose. Why are you making this difficult? Difficult. That word almost made me laugh. You walk into my bedroom. I pointed toward the suitcase. Tell me I'm losing it. Then toward the hallway. Expect me to sleep on my own couch. Finally, I looked directly at Denise. And somehow I'm the difficult one? Nobody answered. Brooke broke the silence. It's only temporary. I turned toward her. How temporary? She shrugged. We'll see. We'll see. Not a week. Not a weekend. Not a date. Just. We'll see. That was the moment something inside me finally stopped fighting. Not exploded. Stopped. Like an engine that had run for years before quietly ceasing forever. I suddenly realized I wasn't arguing over a bedroom. I was arguing over whether I still mattered. The answer stood in front of me. I walked to the closet, opened the door, reached for a small overnight bag. Nobody spoke while I packed a few clothes. Ethan watched. Brooke sat on the edge of my bed scrolling through her phone. My bed. Denise stood in the doorway twisting her wedding ring. Still silent. When I finished, I picked up my pillow. Then the blanket folded across the foot of the bed. As I walked toward the hallway, Ethan stepped aside just enough for me to pass. Not because he respected me, because he expected me to obey. I stopped beside Denise. For 13 years we'd shared birthdays, anniversaries, morning coffee, late-night conversations, hospital visits, holiday dinners, ordinary Tuesdays. A lifetime isn't only measured in decades. Sometimes it's measured in habits. I looked into her eyes. You're really allowing this? She lowered her gaze. They're young, Russell. The same answer. Again. Always the same answer. Young. Comfortable. Don't make a scene. Be the bigger person. I nodded once. Not because I agreed. Because there was nothing left to say. I carried my bag into the living room. The couch suddenly looked much smaller than it ever had before. I spread the blanket across the cushions, placed my pillow at one end, turned off the lamp. A few minutes later, I heard laughter coming from my bedroom. Not the guest room. Not Ethan's room. My bedroom. The laughter continued while I stared into the darkness. Every now and then I heard dresser drawers opening, closet doors sliding, furniture moving across the hardwood floor. They were settling in, like new homeowners. Around midnight, I heard Brooke laughing loudly enough for the sound to carry down the hallway. Then Ethan laughed with her. Denise laughed too. 3 voices. Not one of them came to check whether I needed another blanket. Not one of them asked if I was comfortable. I lay awake for hours. Not crying. Not angry. Simply thinking. Thinking about every mortgage payment. Every utility bill. Every insurance premium. Every repair. Every improvement. Every sacrifice I'd quietly made because I believed this house belonged to a family. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, I stopped trying to sleep. I sat upright on the couch and looked around the dark living room. The grandfather clock ticked steadily against the wall. Each swing of the pendulum seemed louder than the last. Tick, tock, tick, tock. At exactly 6 o'clock, I stood up. No hesitation. No dramatic speech. No slammed doors. I picked up my overnight bag, walked into the garage, backed my pickup truck into the driveway, and began loading every single thing I personally owned. For the first time in 13 years, I wasn't leaving for work. I was leaving for good.